Well, hi everyone, I'm Steve Lee. Welcome to my car, and more generally, welcome to Tesco's car park, although there are other supermarkets that you can shop from. I'm going to be talking over these next few moments around the subject that I've called Real Jesus. Now, the reason why I've called it Real Jesus and not just Jesus or Who is Jesus is because there are a lot of imaginary Jesuses, if I can put a plural to the word Jesus, which I probably can't. The real Jesus I'm talking about is the Jesus of the Bible. That's what we're going to dig into for the next few minutes. Mick Jagger, frontman of the Rolling Stones, said this, and I quote, "Jesus was fantastic, but I don't like the church very much." I think that's probably true for quite a lot of people. People quite admire Jesus. They admire the teachings of Jesus, but then they take a look at what often would be described as institutional Christianity, and people are not quite so fond of that. Now, I think wrinkly old Mick probably wasn't that keen on religion. That's probably why he said he don't like the church much. But here's something that might be a bit of a shock to you. Jesus wasn't all that keen either. Now, I can hear some of you say, now come off it, Steve. Jesus is all about religion. Most people would imagine Jesus, if you said, imagine someone religious or imagine a religious character, Jesus is going to be right up there. But it's probably not the real Jesus. It's probably the Jesus that's wearing a white dressing gown, maybe wafting around about 6 inches off the ground, kissing babies, the inherited idea of Jesus that maybe comes from stained glass windows or old hymns or assembly at school or Sunday school. We get brought up and we get conditioned to close our eyes and imagine that Jesus was that type of person. But what I want to try and reveal to you today is the Jesus of the Bible, the Jesus who is a fearless advocate of the poor, who went after religion, who tore down barriers in order that ordinary people like us could get a glimpse of what God and what the kingdom of heaven was all about. So before we leave the rock and roll thing, this is Bono, frontman of U2. I think you're going to really like this clip. Watch this.
I look to the scriptures for poetic truth, as well as the sort of historical stuff I'm interested in. And of course, there was a historical Jesus.
No, I'm talking about God.
Oh, right.
And do
well,
you,
I see the person of Christ is my way to understand God.
Do you pray?
Yes.
To whom or what do you pray?
To
and
Christ.
In what way? To Christ.
Yeah.
And what do you pray for?
I pray to get to know the will of God, because then the prayers have more chance of coming true. I mean, that's the thing about prayer, isn't it? I mean, we don't do it in a very lofty way in our family. There's just a bunch of us on the bed, usually. We have a very big bed in our house. And we've prayed with all our kids. We read the scriptures, we pray. It's not even regular. Sometimes if we go to church on a Sunday, we go when the church is ended and we'll just go in on our own as a family.
For peace and quiet.
For peace and quiet, and we'll pray, usually about people that we know who are struggling with something, illness or whatever.
So then, what or who was Jesus as far as you're concerned?
I think it's a defining question for a Christian, is who was Christ. And I don't think you're let off easily by saying a great thinker or a great philosopher, or because actually he went round saying he was the Messiah. That's why he was crucified. He was crucified because he said he was the Son of God. So he either, in my view, was the Son of God, or he was
not.
Nuts.
Nuts, yes.
Forget
yes.
rock and roll messianic complexes. This is like, Charlie Manson type delirium. And I find it hard to accept that all the millions and millions of lives, half the earth, for 2,000 years have been touched, have felt their lives touched and inspired by some nutter. I don't believe it. I think,
therefore it follows that you believe he was divine.
yes.
And therefore it follows that you believe that he rose physically from the dead.
Yes, yeah, I have no problem with miracles. I'm living around them. I am one.
So when you pray, then you pray to Jesus,
Yes,
the risen Jesus,
yes,
and you believe that he made promises which will come true.
yes. I do.
Powerful stuff indeed. So the question that I'm going to try and wrestle with over these next few minutes is basically, who is Jesus? I'm going to try and answer that question, not what is Christianity? Big difference. Now, Christianity is totally unique. Now, whether it's true or not is a different question, and that's what we've all got to work out for ourselves. But Christianity is different for this reason. If you take the main figures out of most other world religions, you've basically still got the religion intact. The reason for that is because the religion is based on the teachings of the founder of that religion or the central character of that particular faith. Christianity is a religion. I don't really want to call it a religion because I'm not a big fan of religion either. But as a belief, as a way of life, as a truth, Christianity is different, because if you take Jesus out of Christianity, it collapses. There's nothing left of it, because it's not really based around the things that he said. It's about the person of Jesus. Hopefully what I'm going to say in a minute is going to make that a little bit clearer. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and wrestle to the ground 3 smaller questions in answer to the bigger question as to who Jesus is, who the real Jesus is. And my first question is this: real or fake? In other words, are we dealing with a real person? Are we dealing with an historical figure? Are we dealing with somebody who actually lived? We'll come on to answer the question as to what kind of person he was if he did actually live. But how do we know that this person, Jesus, actually is a real person from history? I reckon most of us are okay with the idea that Thomas the Tank Engine and Batman are made up characters. Maybe that is a devastating shock to some of you, but they are creations of the authors of books and the makers of films. So how do we know that Jesus is not just like Thomas the Tank Engine, that he's not just made up, that someone has not just peddled this idea that a man called Jesus existed? If someone famous today says something or does something, we know that they exist, we know that they're real, we can establish that because social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, does its thing and reports and re-reports, retweets the fact that this person has said this or has done that, and the thing goes viral, sometimes within minutes. Now, we all know that Donald Trump, David Beckham and Kim Kardashian are real characters. And I can tell you, I know they're real because they've all tweeted in the last few hours and I've checked. But Jesus existed 2,000 years ago, before the days of social media. So how can we authenticate something that is essentially only recorded in an old book called the Bible? Now, in a later episode, we're going to talk about the Bible in a bit more depth, but it's true to say, and I want to concede the point, if I can put it like that the vast majority of the stories and the encounters, the life and times of Jesus Christ, are what are recorded in 4 books in the Bible: Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, but not all of it. Other contemporary historians, both Jewish and Roman, religious and political, were writing or recorded information about this person called Jesus. Most of the information is in the Bible, yes, but not all of it. And you know what? There is more evidence pointing to the existence of a man called Jesus who lived and walked the earth 2,000 years ago than there is of any other historical contemporary figure of Jesus, including Julius Caesar. So why is it that people say, do you know what? Jesus is a made-up character. He never even existed. I want to answer that question with this statement. Lots of people dismiss the idea that Jesus was a real person because the alternative is unthinkable. The alternative is that maybe the things that he said are true, and maybe that means that that he has a claim on our lives. Maybe the things that he said become a little bit more disturbing because he spoke about the human condition. He talked about our separation from God. He talked about the need for us to follow him. But maybe the most impressive, the most compelling evidence that supports the fact that Jesus was a real person is the evidence of the billions of people alive today and throughout the centuries who have followed this man Jesus and have claimed that something transformational has taken place in their lives because of it. Now, if you could take two piles of Christians, to use a rough analogy, on one pile is all the Christians on planet Earth that are alive today, pile one. Pile two is all the Christians that have gone since Jesus lived and died and rose from the dead 2,000 years ago up until the current time. The first pile would be bigger. In other words, there are more Christians alive today. There are more people who believe in this man and worship him than there are in the whole of the rest of history put together. Huge evidence to suggest that Jesus was not a fairy story character, but Jesus was a real character, that the real Jesus actually walked planet Earth. So my second question is, good or God? So if all the evidence points to the fact that Jesus was a real person, in other words, a man called Jesus Christ walked planet Earth, I think the response to that quite often is, so what and who cares? Because a bit like Thomas the Tank Engine and Batman, I think people are pretty much okay with the idea that Jesus lived. Bono clearly is quite impressed. Mick Jagger, who's not a Christian as far as I know, he's pretty impressed at Jesus as well. Perhaps a better question is, good or God? In other words, was Jesus just a good guy who helped people? Or was he, and is he, the saviour of the world? That's what we're going to try and get to grips with. Okay, it's video time again. I make these short films called Big Story, and this is one that I want you to watch. It's just a few minutes, and hopefully it will give you a bit more of an idea of who the real Jesus really is. It's called Water into Wine. I hope you enjoy it.
A famous old oil painting hangs in the Louvre in Paris. It tells the story of the first recorded miracle of Jesus, and it took place in the most unimaginably non-religious environment, a full-scale wedding banquet. This is water into wine. I'm sure you're all familiar with weddings, but here's something you need to know about this particular wedding. It lasted several days, and there was a bit more by the way of booze than a few gin cocktails, an ice bucket, and some slices of lime. Lots of us have grown up with the idea of Jesus as a slightly patronising, dull, religious irrelevance. But here's an interesting question. If that's really who he was, then what on earth was he doing on the invitation list, and quite possibly as an honoured guest sitting at the top table? Of all the places Jesus could have selected, this is where he goes public for the first time, in front of his disciples, his mother, and the local community. Everything is going to plan until disaster strikes. A hospitality malfunction of the highest order. The wine runs out. The father of the bride is staring down the barrel of public humiliation, to say nothing of the company that has been trusted with the catering contract. But just as the revelers are about to be given the bad news, Jesus makes his move. He tells the staff to fill 6 30-gallon containers with water and serve it up to the guests. Not a great idea. To everyone on the inside, this is a joke that really isn't very funny, but they're not exactly flushed with alternative suggestions, so they go along with the Jesus plan. And that's when the miracle takes place. As the water from the containers touches the glasses, it is mysteriously turned into wine. Needless to say, the host is relieved to see the old vino flowing again, and apparently it's pretty decent stuff, not too shabbily. None other than Chateau Lafite 45 BC, and lots of it. I've done the maths for you. It amounted to around 400 bottles. So there you have it. The first recorded miracle of Jesus, performed on behalf of a guy who made a miscalculation on a booze order. It challenges every stereotype and misconception about who Jesus is and what he is like. Apparently, he lives in the ordinary and not the religious. Apparently, he identifies with the scrapes and the mistakes and the misjudgments that define our lives. Maybe you're of the opinion that Jesus only exists in the quaint old stories in an old dusty Bible. Let me encourage you to think again. There's a whole lot of difference between the real Jesus and the Jesus of religious traditions and expensive oil paintings. He also did a whole lot more than replenish the bar at weddings. Jesus demonstrated the love and power of the Father, but the shadow of the cross was behind every miracle and every act of kindness. After 3 years among the people, he was sentenced to die by crucifixion by a religious court. But then, after 3 days, he was raised to life once again. And the people saw him. On one occasion, 500 of them at the same time in the same place. This is not dead religion. It is a brand new start, a new hope in relationship with a Father who loves us and longs to forgive us through what Jesus did through his life, his death, and his resurrection. Jesus Christ lived the life that we could never have lived. And on the cross, he paid a debt that we could never have paid.
So there you have it, the real Jesus. This is what the Bible says. These are the recorded words of Jesus in John's Gospel, chapter 14 and verse 9. This is what Jesus said. If you've seen me, you've seen God. In other words, Jesus through his life is like a mirror image, like a reflection of who God is being cast down upon the streets. If you want to know the answer to the question, what is God like? Look at the life and times of Jesus. Look at the way that he reacted. Look at the way that he responded with love and compassion to people who really needed a second chance in life. When he said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. If you've seen me, you've seen God. He's saying, look at me. Look at the things that I'm doing. Look at the actions, and even more importantly, the reactions. And that is what God is like. The real Jesus. It's so important that we get an understanding of who the real Jesus is because if we don't understand who the real Jesus is, we haven't got a chance of understanding what God is like. Here's what C.S. Lewis said, the author of the Chronicles of Narnia. I love those stories. I'm really, really into them. He wrote a number of other books as well, but probably Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia, is his most famous work. But he was a Christian, and this is what he said, and I quote, "A man who is just a man, but said the sort of things that Jesus said, would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or he would be the devil himself. Either he was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse." Jesus never claimed to be a good man. Jesus claimed to be the Son of God. Okay, so one final question to attempt to answer today, and then we're through, and I really hope to see you again next time. And my final question on this list, if you remember, we've talked about real or fake, we talked about good or God, and now we're talking about dead or alive. In other words, is this just a 2,000-year-old story, even a true story? Jesus, fine, he lived. Jesus, yes, he was a miracle worker. Maybe he was the Son of God. Yeah, I can live with that as well. But is he still alive? Because if Jesus is just in a 2,000-year-old story, I would suggest he can't do a great deal for us. But when Jesus rose from the dead on Easter Sunday, the very first Easter Sunday, 3 days after he was executed on a cross, which we'll talk about next week, 3 days later, the tomb that Jesus was put in was empty, and people were starting to see Jesus physically raised from the dead. Now, that's a bit weird. I do understand that. It can sound a bit weird. Because dead people do tend to stay dead. That's the reality. But despite extensive search around the area where Jesus lived and died, the body of Jesus has yet to be found. That's because after 3 days, God the Father physically raised Jesus from the dead, and he has not died since. And that's why people are encountering not the dead Jesus, but the living Jesus, the Jesus who was raised on the third day from the dead. Next time, we're going to talk about, in episode 3, we're going to try and answer the question, which is all about why did Jesus die? And I really hope that today has given you a little frame in order to sit Jesus in. Maybe it's the more informed version than maybe you had before. I do want to thank you for engaging with this. I consider it a real privilege to be able to sit in my car and talk to you about these things that are really, really important. Don't forget, you can engage with us online, but more importantly, talk to the people who told you about this, and maybe you can do that over Zoom or a phone call or whatever, and I will see you again next time. God bless you all.